Welcome to episode 1 of the Nutmeg Podcast, and I'm starting a week late. It's just because I basically didn't have this concept last week. This week will be the Monday episode. We'll be analysing what is now last week's games. And boy oh boy is there some shit to talk about with this. We'll start out with Wolves versus Man United. It's one of the hardest games I've really had to watch. It was a really interesting one to analyse. It makes it extremely difficult to analyse, in fact. It's the only game on the Monday I managed to watch it fully, live. And it was a game of two halves, to use a very old cliche. United looked unbelievable in the first half. Probably the best I've seen them play possession-wise since Fergie managed to leave, finally. Possession-wise, they were unbelievable. 66% possession against Wolves at Manu is nothing to overlook. It's a hard place to play, and it was a hard place to play for Man United last season, losing 2-1 both times. It was an awful place for them to play last season. And the fact that they actually had that much possession kind of came as a surprise when you look at the Week 1 game against Chelsea, the 4-0, where they just sat back on the counter to unbelievable effect. We really weren't expecting this kind of performance from a team like Man United under Solskjaer, but I think it worked for the first half. I mean, it was pretty unbelievable, but they only managed 9 shots in the whole game, and that's a problem. When they're really playing that dominantly in the first half and struggle to put the ball even on target or even get a shot off, is a problem I've seen with Man United over the last couple of years. As a Man United fan, it's hard to watch at times. Against deep-lying defensive blocks, we look awful, despite having massive possession. And one of the problems that you really start to see when we're facing deep-lying blocks and have a lot of possession is that Martial and Rashford just shouldn't play on the same pitch together. Both really, really good players, but should not be playing on the same pitch together. That's a hard thing to say because they're both brilliant players. I actually probably rate Martial a little bit higher than I do Rashford, but they just play on top of each other the whole time. Martial wants to play on the left wing, Rashford wants to play on the left wing, and it was a huge problem watching this game. I mean, that first half was just... It almost felt like Man United had 10 players on the pitch because Rashford and Martial were so close to each other at all times on the left wing. It's not good when they're playing together, and the goal came down that left-hand side, to give them credit, off of a lot of intricate play with Luke Shaw and Martial and Rashford. But that intricate play takes so much skill and so much time to build up in a game where you get the opportunity to do that. It's just unnecessary if Martial were to play more central, or just switch the roles and Rashford plays more central. Someone needs to be in the middle, because when you look at the pitch and you've got Shaw, Martial, Rashford, Pogba, oftentimes within about 10 yards of each other on the left, Dan James looks isolated, to say the least. It's hard to watch someone like Dan James, who needs help because he's a speed player and he needs someone to play balls to him, when his only option in this game was Wan-Bissaka. It's hard to watch him do that, because Wan-Bissaka is not an offensive player. So if you can pull Pogba more to the right, or even Martial to the right, then that works a little bit better, because having Martial on top of Dan James works in a totally different way than it does with Rashford on top of it. Because Martial and Dan James play off of each other, where Martial and Rashford are essentially the same player. It's a problem. But despite the first half success, United were massively helped by Wolves looking fucking awful. It was probably the worst I've seen Wolves play in a long time. It was like watching Wolves play against the bottom 6 team last season, where they just seemed scared for whatever reason. Every time they pressed Man United in the first half, they ended up pussing out and just running back into their own half to do a defensive deep-lying block, which worked because Man United didn't exploit it. But that first half all went to waste when in the second half Wolves came out on an absolute mission to score, and Adama Traore just decided he was going to dominate Luke Shaw. Just dominate Luke Shaw. I mean, Luke Shaw looked okay in the first half, but my God, Adama Traore made him look like he did in Southampton in those kind of days. It was bad. But, you know, the goal came off of a worldie from Ruben Neves, but it was off of a really good corner routine, where United were not guarding a player who consistently scores worldies. Not a little bit, but consistently scores worldies, and you're not manning him up on a corner from outside the box. That's a problem. That's just, it shows a bit of a lack of communication and planning on the Man United side that they need that. But at 1-1, it almost seemed like Wolves were going to take it away until more intricate play, again down the left, because that's the only way Man United are playing lately, because that's where most of their players seem to gravitate towards. There was the moment of intricate play that led to a penalty won by Paul Pogba. It was a soft penalty. He was hurdling a challenge, but he did get caught on the foot. It wasn't a dive like Jan James had earlier on in the match. It was not a dive. Watch the footage. He was almost trying to dive, but he got lucky, he got caught on the foot. Because it may have gone to VAR and gotten overturned. So Pogba wins the penalty, and there is a very brief conversation between him and Rashford about who takes it, and Pogba goes to take it. And he doesn't do his signature little bullshit steppy run up like he usually does. He just goes and hits it. Never looks at where the keeper is, decides where he's going to try and put it. Doesn't really hit the corner, but puts a lot of power behind it, but Patricio guesses right, and he misses. And it doesn't seem like as much of a problem if it wasn't the goal that would win the game, but it also doesn't seem like as much of a problem if Rashford hadn't hit a world-class penalty the week before against Chelsea, 4-0, and Rashford hit an amazing penalty. It was the first goal of the game. It was incredible pressure against Chelsea, and he hit it upper left corner over the goalie, which if he'd hit it exactly the same way, it would have beaten Patricio. And Pogba didn't get it into the corner. Pogba didn't get it very high. He kind of hit it at a good height for a keeper who guesses the right way, because you can still beat keepers that guess the right way. But this was a poor penalty. And when you look at his statistics, that Pogba has missed more pens since his debut than any other player in that time period. He's 7 for 11. He's got 4 misses. That's hard to start justifying a 60-ish% success rate on a one-on-one with no defenders, open goal from 12 yards out. That starts to look a little bit weak, and I've never really heard of a team that has 2 penalty takers like Solskjaer tried to claim after the match. I'm not sure if it is real. It seems convenient that he would have 2 penalty takers, and that seems like a little bit of a get out of jail card for him, but it should be Rashford. Pogba's just not consistent enough, and the fact that he's changed his run up shows that he's potentially seeing that he's having problems from that. It just should be Rashford. It's a good game to watch, a hard game as a Man United fan to watch, because it was a bit of deja vu of the Mourinho era, where we sometimes looked like the better team but couldn't really get much attacking for hours off. And for a team that had 66 possessions to have 9 shots and 2 on target in the whole game, it is bad. It is really bad. And when you look at a game that I'll be talking about later with Man City versus Spurs, Man City had 30 shots. That's the difference at the moment, and I think after the Chelsea game, Man United supporters maybe got a little bit ahead of themselves and didn't realise that there's a lot more of a problem to it. Speaking of the Chelsea game, we'll talk about the Chelsea game for week 2, coming off of a 4-0 loss to Manchester United away, and a penalty loss midweek in the Super Cup against Liverpool. Went away and played at home this round to Leicester, a team that have a lot to prove this year without Maguire, and in their first full year under Brendan Rodgers. And if you think 1-1s are boring games, then go back and watch this one. You will be absolutely proven wrong. It was end to end. I watched it live, and Leicester looked great. And without the Ndidi mistake that gifted Mount his goal, they really didn't give a whole lot of clear-cut chances away. There were a couple that I think they played well, especially against Chelsea away. Their new centre defensive partnership with Evans and Kaglar Soyuncu. Not really sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I mean, Soyuncu looks brilliant. He looks like a very good like-for-like replacement, at least defensively, for Maguire. He's nowhere near as good on the ball, but he is a real hard man, and he looked like someone you don't really want to mess with. He looks like a real Leicester player. He's not really a new player for them, but he was on loan last year, but he looks like a real Leicester player. And Chelsea, to their credit, looked better than they did week 1, by a mile. But still not really the way we're expecting a Chelsea team to look. Week 2 in the Premier League, I don't know. I didn't get the feeling that we were watching a great Chelsea team, especially going forward. Giroud and Abraham, maybe not the kind of players that you need around Mount and Pulisic, if I'm being honest. But they looked a little bit worse than they did midweek in the Super Cup. But the bright spark for them was probably Pulisic. He looked tight on the ball, but I still wouldn't value him at the 73 million that he came in for over the summer. In fact, if you watch the Chelsea game and the United games in this past week and just watch Dan James and Christian Pulisic, you'd think they were a pretty similar level of player, and the 50 million price tag difference must be fairly hard for Chelsea fans to swallow, at least I would imagine. But based on what you're seeing as well, Pulisic could, keyword could, be worth 70 odd in a couple of years, whereas I think Dan James' ceiling probably comes below that. Leicester could have and should have capitalised on some of the great runs from Vardy later on in the game. He still looks like he's more than good enough for Leicester. Not good enough for a top 6 team, but more than good enough for Leicester. And Tielemans, the new Belgian midfielder that they brought in after the loan last year from Monaco, was the main culprit of not capitalising on some of those Vardy runs later on. I mean, there was one nearer to the end of the game where if he just turned and played it quicker, it's 2-1 Leicester, game over. And he missed it. He just missed it. He decided to play it out to Maddison on the right. That was a glaring theme of this game. Leicester midfielders not taking advantage of some of the runs that Vardy was really tearing through the Chelsea defence late on. And that could be up to, especially with Tielemans, it could be up to him still getting up to Premier League speed. But that excuse kind of has a lot of less gravity when you look at he had 4 assists and 3 goals last season in 13 games for Leicester on his loan. That excuse kind of doesn't stand up as much. But it was a good game to watch if you're not a fan of 1-1 draws, and if you didn't watch the highlights or the whole game of this because you looked back at the results and thought 1-1, pretty boring game. Watch it. It's interesting. It's an interesting look into how Frank Lampard is going to try and change up his Chelsea team when he's in a bit of a bind. Willian coming on didn't seem like the right choice. But it's an interesting game to watch. Other takeaways from that game: James Maddison is just a baller. He's straight up a baller. He looked like a real player in that second half. He came out of the dressing room and decided he's going to take over. In my opinion, he should be getting more praise and attention than Mason Mount at the moment. Mason Mount kind of gets it because he's playing for Chelsea and he played under Frank and he's got an interesting storyline. But James Maddison's better. James Maddison seems like the kind of player that if you look at a Man City, a Spurs, a Liverpool, a Chelsea, potentially even looking at some of the French teams, look at PSG or even Lyon. Even Dortmund could use someone like James Maddison, pair him up with Sancho, despite that being kind of something that's been rumoured that might even happen at United down the line. He's a baller. He needs to move out of Leicester probably at the end of this season if Leicester don't accomplish a top 6 breakthrough. So, on to a very big game this weekend. We had Manchester City at home versus Spurs, and it was the game that probably warranted the most attention in the lead up to this weekend, looking at all of the fixtures, and it really delivered. City looked just as good as usual, but lately Spurs just seem like they've got City's number, or are at least somehow rigging these matches to have drama late on and then to get a result. The game started off really, really well for City. The first goal for them came from Raheem Sterling on a header, which is a weird one, but it came mostly from De Bruyne putting in a first-time ball that was just a peach, landed where he couldn't not put it away. But to his credit, it wouldn't have happened before. Sterling just wouldn't have been there. In his Liverpool days and early on at Man City, he wouldn't have been there, and Pep's made him that kind of player where he scores goals now, and he headed it straight back across the keeper, and perfect goal. Really good start, and City switched off right after that. And Lamela scored, which is the weird thing to say against City, but Lamela brings the ball all the way up the middle of the pitch, slots it past Ederson, who is massively out of position. Massively out of position, which is a rare thing to say about Ederson, but it was a problem, and it's 1-1, and City had to switch back on, which they did to their credit, rapidly equalising with a De Bruyne goal, De Bruyne assist to Aguero goal, that gave me so much deja vu. And I mean, we've seen it so much from City under Pep that it's becoming embarrassing that teams aren't stopping it, especially teams of Spurs calibre. It's just De Bruyne bringing it down the right, and instead of crossing it in, passing it near post to Aguero, and it's so obvious it's going to happen. You're almost watching it in slow motion, and teams aren't stopping it. After years of watching Pep managed City teams, I don't know how we're not stopping it. And they went up 2-1, but City players must absolutely cack themselves when Lucas Moura steps on the pitch, because they did on this occasion. They cacked themselves because bloody no one was looking at him on the corner where he was substituted. No one was looking at him, and he scored an excellent but free header where City players just didn't know who to mark, or didn't want to look at Lucas Moura because they're still scared after the Champions League drama last year. That was bad. So it's 2-2, and then the biggest moment of controversy in the game happened 92nd, 93rd minute. VAR, which are probably the three scariest letters in the world for City fans at the moment, especially when facing Spurs lately. But it was the right call. It just was. It was definitely the right call under the new law that no hands can be involved in the lead-up or scoring of a goal. So no matter how angry you want to get at the use of VAR, it was correct. It hit Aymeric Laporte on his left arm, despite the fact he's going for a header, and despite the fact that I think it was Vertonghen's right arm was on his arm. You can't say that VAR didn't get it right. And it doesn't take away from the game. That is a mistake from the referee that, admittedly, it's very hard for him to see, but it's a mistake from the referee that was rectified by the use of VAR. So in that case, you should not be angry with VAR, you should be angry with the law that VAR is enforcing. And with City having 30 shots, there's plenty of other chances in that game that they simply didn't take, and it's the first time we've seen this year that City are potentially vulnerable. It was a good game to watch though, really good game to watch, and another interesting moment, Aguero got really, really fucking pissed off that he got taken off and was basically going to fight Pep, which is something we haven't seen. We've usually seen Pep in massive control of his team. It was an interesting hot point that I think could potentially lead to more incidents down the line, especially because Aguero is going to feel very entitled after being such a good servant for Man City. When he gets taken off in a big game where he's been playing well for Gabriel Jesus, he's got kind of a right to be a little bit annoyed, but shouldn't be doing that on the sideline. He's a professional. Pep's doing it for a reason. And after the goal that they thought was a goal from Jesus, he went and hugged Pep, probably just to cover his arse a little bit. So we'll see about that one. Separate takeaway from this match was that Rodri is a really good football player. He's just really good at football. And his price tag over the summer, which I think is 60 odd, 70 odd million, is very quickly looking more and more like a bargain. especially when you start seeing him as a Fernandinho 2.0 rather than just a Fernandinho replacement, because he gives them so many more opportunities going forwards. It's becoming apparent that Rodri is potentially a bargain and potentially the best transfer of the 2019 summer window. At this point I want to talk about a game that probably not a lot of people cared about, unless you're a Sheffield United fan, and it was Sheffield United 1, Crystal Palace 0. Sheffield United in their first home game of the Premier League season after 12 years of not being in the Premier League. They got 3 points against the Palace team that look awful. And it begs the question, are Palace in trouble this season, even with Zaha, even though they tried so hard to keep him? Because realistically, outside of Zaha and maybe Milivojevic, who would any Premier League team want out of that roster? Wan-Bissaka's gone, and it honestly makes their defence look really subpar. Scott Dan's 32, Martin Kelly's 29. That looks like a centre-back partnership that are past their prime. And to be honest, I can't really remember their prime, as sad as that sounds. Patrick Van Aanholt at left back has always been the bright spot of their defence outside of Wan-Bissaka. But he finds himself pinned really far back playing for Crystal Palace, because they're almost always on the defensive. And he's just not a defensive fullback. He can't show his best attributes in a team like this. He's an attacking-minded player. He's really a left winger. Joel Ward is an awful replacement at right back for Wan-Bissaka. They didn't re-spend the money. Man United bought in that right back at a really early point in the transfer window, and they didn't reinvest. And Joel Ward has played pretty much the last 4 seasons before the Wan-Bissaka rise. He played almost every game for Palace, but he's not very good. And that was shown in the 18-19 seasons, where he only played 7 games. Despite playing loads of games before that season, multiple 30-plus game seasons before the Wan-Bissaka rise. I mean, him playing 7 games shows that Palace know he's a liability. Period. He's never had more than 2 assists in a season. Most of the time only managing 1. He's played multiple 30-plus games in seasons. 2 assists isn't good. He's not particularly good defensively. I mean, to put it in perspective, Wan-Bissaka in his 1 real season at Palace had 3 assists. So more than Joel Ward has ever put into perspective. And that really puts Joel Ward into perspective that he's just not good enough. Especially considering among most pundits, Wan-Bissaka's worst attribute is his defensive game. However, through all the faults that became clear in the Palace game, one thing became clear, is that Sheffield United are not a walkover team for this season. They're a good football team. They're going to pose problems to teams. They've got an innovative, inverted centre-back tactic, and it's going to propose problems to teams that will underestimate a newly promoted team and really go for it offensively against Sheffield United. And when Sheffield United win the ball back, there will be a point where deep in the midfield, those inverted centre-backs will make that progression forward ahead of the 4 or 5 players that teams that are underestimating them will throw forward, and then you've got 7 on 4 coming out of the back. It's going to be an interesting watch, Sheffield, this year with that tactic, and I think they could shock a few top half of the table teams. But they have a problem in that they may get the ball forward, but their 2 striking options have looked awful, tragic in the last couple games. McGoldrick looks really out of his depth at the PL level. 15 goals last season, I think it is. Awful this season. He just doesn't look right. He's missed some sitters this year. And they really need Ollie McBurney to develop really, really quickly. Really quickly. And for me, playing Callum Robinson, who they acquired off Preston, ahead of McBurney is a really weird choice from Chris Wilder. Really weird. Because Robinson had 10 goals for Preston last year, which is weak compared to McBurney's 22 last season. And 22 last season looks really good, but I still think that his fee is over the top. 17.5 million, which potentially rises to 20 million. For a 23-year-old Scottish striker in the Championship, a good Championship striker, but who looked weak in his kind of half season where Swansea was still in the Prem. And at 23, he's not a young prospect by today's standards. He's just not. But they need that fee to be realised quickly. Robinson and McGoldrick, not good enough. Not good enough up top. Speaking of someone who's really, really good up top, let's move to another game that not many people probably would have been too interested in. Norwich beat Newcastle 3-1 at home. And the player who's really, really good up front is Teemu Pukki. He goes for a hat-trick against Newcastle. And he looks like someone who could save Norwich. Keep them up this year. Because when he's in the box, he picks his spot and hits it. Every time. It doesn't matter if he gets set, he picks a spot and hits it. I've seen his Liverpool performance and his Newcastle performance now. And in the Liverpool game they got battered because they wanted to play offensively. But he was a bright spot nearer to the end of the game where he just picked a spot and nailed it. It was a consolation goal, but he scored it against Liverpool. It was against Adrian, not Alisson, but he scored it. And against Newcastle, he was tucking away goals left, right, centre. Both feet, deceiving the keeper, almost hitting it the direction the keeper was never anticipating. He looks really good. He looks really good, and it's important for Norwich because they are not good enough defensively to play defensively like most people kind of want them to. They're not good enough defensively. They've got two really promising fullbacks, Max Aarons and Jamal Lewis, I think his name is. Look really good, but they're offensive style players. Their two centre backs, pretty good. That Bennett guy, I think his name is. Bennett. I'm going to go with that. And Grant Hanley look okay. Grant Hanley's not good enough. But the other young 21-year-old English centre back, Man United were rumoured looking at him last year. He looked good. He looked good. But they're not a defensive team. And they shouldn't be playing defensively with a striker like Pukki. He's good enough to score goals. And they will score goals. I see them being bottom half of the table, maybe high up bottom half. I don't think they'll necessarily be in a relegation battle. They have potential to kind of, what I like to say is do a Crystal Palace. When Crystal Palace came up years ago now, they kept a lot of that core that brought them up. And they had some fairly exciting young players. They had a good core and kind of became people's second team because they played attacking and didn't sit back too often. They look good, and that's what Norwich are doing now. They look really, really good. They've got a culture around that team, and a lot of that culture is built around them having one star player in Teemu Pukki and a couple of young fullbacks. And I like Norwich this season, and I think they may stay up and have a good chance at it. But the other team in that game was Newcastle, and they look poor under Steve Bruce. He's mostly just confirming the issues that a lot of the fans have with him, because a consolation goal against Norwich is not what the fans would be expecting with that team, and rightly so. I think they're better than that. Fabian Schär's brilliant. Dubravka's a good goalkeeper. John Joe Shelby's always had potential. Joe Linton should be putting away goals, but he missed a sitter against Norwich. St. Maximin could be really good. I think Newcastle fans have a right to be frustrated, and I think Steve Bruce will not help that. It was a good game to watch, and Pukki's really, really good. Those are the takeaways that I had from this week. 5 games that I think were important to analyse. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other results from this weekend. Just give a quick word about some of them. Arsenal-Burnley. Burnley were okay, pretty poor. Arsenal managed to see that off. Good win for them. Currently sitting I think second in the league, but still have defensive problems. Giving one away to Burnley is not what you want. Southampton, Liverpool, 2-1 Liverpool away. That was a good game. Danny Ings scored off of a howler off of Adrian, but outside of that, Liverpool looked pretty comfortable and probably look a little bit better than City at the moment in my eyes. West Ham Brighton 1-1, good result for West Ham. They've had some bad results against Brighton. away in the last couple of years, or last year especially. Good result for West Ham. A point there, I think both teams can be fairly happy. Everton-Watford, Everton 1-0 over Watford. Oh, I forget who scored in that game. Oh, it was Bernard. It was a great little goal off the left. He looks like a good player. And it creates problems because Bernard off the left now means that you've basically got Richarlison and Moise Keane in the middle, attacking-wise. And that's going to be a hard option for Marco Silva to choose. Watford did not look very good. I think Watford are one of my early picks to potentially get relegated, and a lot of people wouldn't be saying that about Watford, but their defence is shocking. Their two strikers are past it. They're just past it. Andre Gray's a good striker, Troy Deeney's not. Will Hughes is a spark for them, but I don't think it'll be enough. I think Watford may go down. We've talked about Norwich Newcastle, Aston Villa Bournemouth. Bournemouth looked in control. Aston Villa had really one great opportunity, and Jack Grealish had an opportunity later on in the game. Villa are not as bad as their first two results have shown, but they're not as good as I think their transfer work makes them look. Bournemouth still look like a decent team, still probably low end of the table, high low end, kind of 11 through 14 area. I don't think they'll be in a relegation battle. We've talked about City, Tottenham, Sheffield United, Crystal Palace, Chelsea and Leicester, and Wolves Man United. So, interesting week of fixtures. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me blab on about them for what's now just over half an hour. And I hope that if you like the Nutmeg Podcast, you will subscribe to us, because we'll have videos coming out as often as I can make them. Throughout the 1920 season, we may end up talking about not just the Premier League in other episodes. Usually the Monday episode will be about the Premier League. But yeah, I've had fun making this. I hope you had fun listening. Please leave a like if you like the video, subscribe if you're new and you want to hear more from us. And from me, goodbye. Thanks.